From Armageddon difficulty, coloured wooden planks, non-rectangular nether portals, a music villager, reindeers and pigment bodyguards, to enchanted dispensers, exploding arrows, customizable maps and signs, dispenser minecarts, camouflaging mobs, waterlogged leaves and flowers, and pausing a multiplayer server, Minecraft could have been a very different game. Back when Minecraft was still very new, Notch had lots of plans for the game that he shared excitedly, many of which never came to be. Throughout the years, many Minecraft developers have also brought up in development features, ideas, or even showed us early examples of Minecraft items and blocks that would be forgotten forever. Today we talk about the Minecraft features Notch and many of the game's developers decided not to add. Back when Minecraft was in alpha, Notch mentioned that he wanted to add a realism slider for difficulty to the game. Basically, Notch wanted there to be a difficulty which at its most difficult would be similar to Fallout New Vegas' hardcore mode, indicating he wanted food and other sources of healing to heal over time rather than instantly, where players had to eat periodically and regularly sleep, and healing would require specific items. Now this is interesting because a lot of these features would be implemented into normal survival in beta 1.8, so it seemed that Notch decided against the idea of a slider and threw realism features into normal survival mode instead. Prior to survival mode becoming a thing in multiplayer, Notch originally planned to make survival multiplayer more balanced by adding late game challenges such as Mega Beasts or ill omens such as Nights of Absolute Horror, whereby torchlights would flicker or not work and a big red eye would appear on the moon and look around. However, multiplayer would never deviate from single player as Notch seemed to originally plan. One Minecraft feature which has remained almost unchanged since their addition to the game are clouds, which most players, including myself, just turn off entirely. Roughly 13 years ago now, however, a player suggested on Reddit that clouds should be more dynamic and unique rather than just static and random. Clouds could grow and shrink as they move, they could pile up or dissipate against hills and large terrain, and they would look much more natural, respecting biomes, rain and terrain. The player who suggested this would make a nice GIF demonstrating their proposed changes, and Notch would comment that he thought the suggestion was amazing, but it would be too difficult to add right now, hinting that he would utilize the suggestion in the future. Obviously, that never happened though, which may be due to issues with unloaded chunks, as confirmed by another Minecraft developer in 2018. Like many multiplayer servers, Notch once wanted to add land claim flags to the game. Potentially craftable with gold in survival, they would only allow select players to build in the area and would prevent monsters from spawning or dying in the area as well. Before the official Minecraft feedback website existed, Mojang used to have a page on the now defunct website getsatisfaction.com where players would make suggestions that Mojang could monitor. One such suggestion made in 2010 that was accepted and marked as planned by Mojang or Notch was to make nether-like portals on multiplayer which you could set to a certain server IP that would allow you to transfer to other Minecraft servers when you walked into it. This was a very popular idea that sort of predicted the hub-based networks we have today. The smoke block was something Notch put on his public to-do list back in 2010, blocks which could be generated by fire, float upwards and then disappear. Campfires would be added almost a decade later containing smoke, but are only particles, not blocks. Also in this to-do list at the time, at importance level 5 nonetheless, was to thwart hacking. Minecraft was substantially more prone to exploitation back in its early years, and Notch wanted to implement a client-side anti-cheat that would make a server check for flying, no clip, increased speed, and much more. Servers could however disable this, allowing players to cheat. Considering how common cheating and Minecraft hack clients are, I wonder how this would have played out if it were implemented. In a short documentary and interview with Mojang from early 2011, Jeb mentioned wanting to add scarecrows to the game. He even showcased this crafting recipe, mentioning it would attract monsters. Around the same time, a player would suggest scarecrows on Reddit, to which Jeb would respond that the reason he hadn't added them yet was because he didn't want to mess up the mob code too much. In that same interview, Notch would also mention wanting to add exploding arrows to the game, and did so live in the video, but we would never see them added to a public version of the game. In beta 1.5, when Notch first added statistics and achievements to the game, he mentioned that they would also be stored online soon, potentially allowing for players to compare their stats with a leaderboard. A cool idea that was seemingly forgotten. And one update later, in beta 1.6, when Notch added maps, he mentioned he would also like to add custom paintings and hand-drawn signs. A cool idea which I'm surprised we haven't gotten yet, although I can tell you exactly what players would use it for, and it might not always be pretty. Jeb mentioned on Reddit back in 2011 when asked about a vertical redstone that it would be very challenging to add, but also mentioned it's doable and is one of those later things. Vertical redstone would never come to be, and I can imagine it would have been very revolutionary if it did. We all know you can't pause an online game. Well, Dinnerbone considered changing that and mentioned on Twitter in 2012 that he was considering allowing server operators to pause the game on multiplayer, where players can only use the chat and nothing else until the game is unpaused. A potentially useful idea that would have made for some very entertaining trolling. Taking inspiration from Dinnerbone, you should all pause the video right now and scroll down to the subscribe button and press it, helping me get to 600k subs. No pressure, of course. Dinnerbone also mentioned on Twitter around the same time, in response to a now deleted tweet, that flower pots breaking when hit by arrows are hard to implement, but he was working on it. Clearly it never worked out though. Dinnerbone posted this on Twitter in 2013, a screenshot containing monster spawners in minecarts, which do exist through commands, but also dispenser minecarts, a feature of the game which never ended up making it to public versions. Another redstone-based feature that could have been very game-changing. In a 2013 Reddit AMA, Dinnerbone mentioned that enchantments that improve the old sword blocking feature could be good additions to the game, also hinting at another enchantment system he was working on. This wasn't the only time Dinnerbone mentioned something in this domain, earlier stating that year that he was working on a new attribute system where enchantments could apply attributes. So for example, hitting a spider with a Bane of Arthropod sword would decrease their movement speed attribute, thus slowing them. He would also mention wanting to add uncraftable weapons to the game that could give special attributes such as bows with a faster drawback, boots which increase health, or night vision helmets, yet this was seemingly cancelled as well. This system could have been really interesting for expanding upon the RPG side of the game, but never came to be. Portable light, where you could hold an item such as a torch in your hand to illuminate your surroundings, was acknowledged as being a good addition to the game, but very taxing on game performance. Optifine and various other mods would have no issue adding such a feature known as dynamic lighting, however, and we have still yet to see its implementation into the vanilla game. In 2013, before we had been graced by the presence of Fortnite, Dinnerbone responded to a player asking about RPG style emotes that he would love to see emotes in the game with animation, specifically looking at adding a hug emote animation. Emotes do now exist on Bedrock, to the horror of most of us Java players, with certain clients on Java also implementing them. Personally, I for one am glad this never made it into the game. A former Minecraft employee posted on Twitter back in 2013 a screenshot containing red glass being smelted down into red sand. This was probably just a joke, however. Dinnerbone has mentioned on Twitter that he had an ultimate plan for endermites, potentially involving the dragon egg, but it looks like such plans never came to fruition. Back onto the topic of clouds, and one such feature which would make me and many other players turn them on again is the ability to change the height they are at. This was implemented into a test version of Minecraft by a developer, but the change ended up being controversial amongst the team, and as such, it was scrapped. Jeb once responded to a now deleted tweet on Twitter that one day Mesa temples, the Mesa biome equivalent to the desert temple, may be added. Some of you may not know that you can set the world border to shrink with commands. However, one thing you cannot do that a player on Twitter suggested is to make it so the center point of the world border could slowly move, thus moving the playable zone. Dinnerbone did respond, mentioning he wanted to add this, but we have yet to see such a feature. Grum, a Minecraft developer, mentioned in response to a detailed 2015 Reddit post discussing the many issues with minecarts that he had plans to improve them, even testing them, but ran into problems that wouldn't be able to be resolved yet. Minecarts are one of Minecraft's most neglected features, receiving very little to no changes since their initial addition over a decade ago, and unfortunately it seems they won't see any changes in the near future. And on the topic of minecarts, Jeb mentioned on Twitter in 2016 that it would begin phasing out the furnace minecart, arguably one of the most unused blocks in all of Minecraft. So it also seems like the minecart system may no longer be a priority for future updates. In 2016, Jeb responded to a Reddit suggestion talking about a musician villager which could trade music discs, jukeboxes, and note blocks. Jeb commented that he liked the idea, but wasn't sure exactly how to implement it yet. Another suggestion on Reddit that Jeb would respond to around the same time was to make pistons which are unable to push blocks, emit a smoke particle effect, and make a sound. Jeb added it to the team's miner polishing list, and maybe we'll see it in the future. Another feature lost to Jeb's miner polishing list was the ability for enchanted bows to be used in the crafting recipes of dispensers, allowing the dispensers to shoot out arrows which would be affected by the enchantments. This idea sounds really fun, to be honest, and it's a shame it never got added. Let's now discuss some Minecraft features which were not only just mentioned, but were also planned at one stage, yet have still not seen inclusion into the game. When waterlogging was first added to the game back in 2018, Dinnerbone would share a screenshot on Twitter containing waterlogged leaves from trees as well as waterlogged flowers. This was an early showcase of the fact that water may soon be able to be much more dynamic and waterlog more blocks. Dinnerbone would even mention that one day water might be able to waterlog only one side or half of a block, like a glass pane, but we have yet to see further information about that. In 2013, Dinnerbone would post this image on Twitter, showcasing colored wooden planks in 16 colors like wool. He seemed to be trying to get a gauge of approval or interest from players, but ultimately would end up deciding against including them in the game. This idea was eventually replaced with terracotta and its various colors, and while we have gotten some of these wood colors in the game due to new wood types since, we have yet to see most of the ones Dinnerbone showcased. When the Deep, Dark, and Ancient Cities were first announced in 2020, there was going to be another Skulk-related block known as the Skulk Jaw or Skulk Trap that could trap players who walked on it, dealing damage to them. King B-Dogs would mention on Twitter that he wasn't happy with its design and it was unlikely to make it into the game. Way back in 2012, Dinnerbone mentioned on Twitter that he was working on a new mob that had no clothes based on an old popular Minecraft suggestion, but then a few months later it was shelved. 8 years later in 2020, a player would ask Dinnerbone what he was referring to, where Dinnerbone would comment that he was working on a pigman that you could convince to fight for you like a bodyguard, and the reason it was naked was because the player could be responsible for what it wore and what weapons it used. This sounds like a very cool concept, and it's unfortunate it was seemingly cancelled. That being said, due to Dinnerbone's work on the bodyguard, later all types of mobs would be able to pick up and use weapons and armor, with the bodyguard being responsible for this change. Speaking of mobs, according to the wiki, Notch mentioned back in 2010 that he wanted prefix mobs to be added to the game. For example, burning spiders, giant zombies, and more normal mobs with special abilities. These would never come to be, but we did get some special variants of mobs in later years. Back in December of 2014, Jeb would respond to a player's reindeer Reddit suggestion, mentioning they may be added next Christmas. However, almost a dozen Christmases later, and we have no word of their addition. Jeb mentioned during Minecon 2015 that the Shulker was originally meant to be a camouflaging mob that could camouflage with its surroundings. However, he had difficulty with the code and rendering and abandoned the idea, stating that we may see a camouflaging mob in the future though. Back in the Minecraft documentary we talked about earlier, a roadmap for development was showcased, and on it was a friends list. This is something Notch and Jeb would talk about multiple times, but we have never seen such an addition to the game. The nether roof was once considered by Dinnerbone to be used for something else. Dinnerbone would also post this image to Twitter, potentially considering adding non-rectangular or square nether portals to the game, but that also never came to be. Back in 2012, a plugin API for servers known as Workbench was in development, which Notch would mention in a PC Gamer interview should make plugins easier to install and less prone to destroy your game. Dinnerbone seemingly was actually hired somewhat for this reason, as he had previously worked on Buckets, but we would never get such an API. And that about wraps it up for everything that Minecraft could have been. Be sure to subscribe and join my Discord. Thank you all so much for watching.